What is your Tinder horror story?
Got a Tinder notification on my phone, realized I don't have Tinder and was holding my girlfriend's phone.
Buddy of mine hit it off with this girl and after a few days, she invited him over to a house party. Sure, he says, what could go wrong? He shows up and is introduced to a few of her friends, all guys. As the night carries on, more and more guys show up and very few girls are actually at the party. After they start talking about how they all know this girl, they find out that she invited them all from Tinder. Every guy was there not to hook up, but to populate this chick's birthday party. Edit, auto corrects from phone.
The only Tinder date I went on, the woman told me her goal was to get pregnant in the next few months. I noped right out of there.
Started speaking to this guy on Tinder a few months ago. He seemed alright, but not my normal type. Regardless, we started speaking for a couple of days. I didn't realize how stupid I was until now, but I mentioned where I worked. The night I mentioned my workplace, I saw a guy walk past that looked a lot like him. I hadn't met him in person, so I wasn't 100%. I forgot about it, and a couple of days later, it was quiet in work but my phone battery was low. I said I'd speak to him later before my phone died. Him coming in 10 minutes later with a bleeping iPhone charger. Yes, this might have been a nice gesture if you know, I'd actually met him face to face before. This was really weird because he said he lived the other side of the city from where I work. I wanted to cut ties straight away, but I thought I'd return the charger after I finished work. He said he would be in a bar around the corner, so when I finished I met up with him, gave him his charger and made some excuse to go home. To my horror, I saw on his Instagram that he'd taken a smiling selfie earlier in the day with the caption, "I'm now a taken man winking face." I'd seen him like not even twice. To make it even scarier, for a good few weeks, every time I'd finish work I would see him casually walking past on his own, exactly at the time I finished. Really creeped me out for a while.
Tinder guy was apparently engaged when we met and while we were dating. Also found out 2 weeks after the fact that he got married. We had still been talking every day.
Matched with my cousin.
I started talking to this really sweet guy for about 2 weeks and things were going well. Then I started getting calls from this girl, who he claimed was his crazy roommate that was in love with him and kept trying to get him fired from jobs. Turns out, she wasn't the one lying, she was actually his live-in girlfriend, and they had moved here together from a different state. Apparently he wasn't actually a citizen, and was trying to obtain papers. Thanks, Tinder.
Went on a date with a girl who had already told her whole family about me, before we even met. And she wanted me to meet them in person on the first date. Nope.
There was this guy, he was a solid 10 in his pictures. He messages me, asks me if I want to meet up for coffee, so I say yes. He messages me and tells me that I have to pick him up. Okay, whatever, I'll do it. I pick him up, and we decided to go eat instead. He's super funny and cute, so we hang out some more after dinner. Then he pulls out his phone and proceeds to tell me that he has a son and his baby mama took him to Washington but has no idea what part or anything with him and he hasn't seen him in months. So he then takes out his phone and tells me to go through a folder on his phone of pictures of his son. Like 300 of them. He sat there and made me look through every single one, and he would tell me the backstory to basically every single video and photo in that folder. I felt so bad, but man, I was happy when he left. That whole date just got so weird after that. He did some more stuff, but those are good stories for another time. Lol. Edit, I promise you people, he was definitely a 10. I showed pictures of him to my friends and all of them said they would date him with the baggage. He texted me like 8 or 9 times every day after that and I never replied. I ended up having to block him on all social media because he wouldn't take the hint. Thinking back now, poor guy, oh well.
I went on a date with a guy and the entire time he was talking about how men are superior and how there have been scientific studies to show that women have an emotional reaction to the color red when they see it. I wonder why he was single.
On my first and only 30-second Tinder date, she walked out of the subway, looked at me, said, "Sorry, I don't like you," and left. Real life swipe left.
Finally, Started seeing a girl off Tinder. It was going well for about 2 weeks and thought she was pretty cool. Then things started getting weird. She used to always joke about killing me. I thought it was okay the first few times, but then it got annoying. I told her to stop and she kept doing it. IDK if it was because she thought it was funny that it freaked me out or what. Anyways, told me she has a shotgun in her room. Yikes. Long story short, I told her I didn't want to see her anymore. She didn't like that. For the next 3 weeks she's absolutely hounding me. Calls me constantly, shows up at my work asking for me, keeps coming over to my apartment. She actually knocked on my door for 30 minutes. When I didn't answer, she went around back and started knocking on my bedroom window. Got really concerned for a while, but eventually she gave up.
I met this guy on Tinder and we had a couple really fun dates. I was pretty into him, so on our third date, I decided I wanted to have sex with him. He took me out for a really nice date and then he invited me back to his place for a glass of wine. One thing led to another and we started making out on his couch, fully clothed. But this lasted forever. I was ready to go, if you know what I mean. I didn't want to make out the whole night, so I decided to take matters into my own hands and I took off all of my clothes. Then he sits up, still fully clothed, and looks at me, and says, "I can't have sex with you, I have a STD." Possibly most awkward moment of my life. I tried to be super nice about it, but I promptly got dressed and left. And as many of my friends have pointed out, I am extremely grateful that he told me. Edit, he did tell me which STD, it is incurable.
Went out with a girl, and had a great time together. I only knew her first name. We were texting later that night after our date and I told her to add me on Snapchat and gave her my username. She added me and up popped a request from first name last name. Her last name being my mom's very rare maiden name. She was my second cousin. We clarified things briefly and never spoke again.
Hooked up from Tinder. After having sex, the girl whispers in my ear, "So, my mom just died, never saw her again."
Someone matched me while I was at work. By the time I got home I had 4 messages from her. 1. Are you always wearing a hat? 2. Does it not get really manky? 3. Seriously, do you even have hair? 4. Oh bleep, you don't have cancer do you? FYI, I don't have cancer and hadn't realized that I was wearing a hat in all my pictures.
Went on a date with a girl who told me about 3 of her ex-boyfriends of the past 2 years in the first 15 minutes of our date. 1 committed suicide, 1 died in a car accident, and the last had to be gay because who would dump this? Every time she went to the bathroom she would leave her expensive purse and asked me not to leave because if I left and someone stole her purse it would be on my conscience. She also picked a restaurant that her ex-boyfriend, previous of the other 3, was a chef at and said the Lamborghini parked outside was his.
I was recently on holiday and decided I would jump on Tinder to suss out the local talent. I matched with this guy who seemed pretty attractive and we talked for a few days and discussed catching up for drinks which never eventuated. Towards the end of my trip I chatted to him briefly and he explained he was going away the following day, but I was more than welcome to come over to his apartment. Despite having apprehensions about going to a complete stranger's apartment in a foreign country, I decided to go. Nevertheless, everything seemed smooth when I arrived at his house. He was charming, good-looking and talkative. We got talking and one thing led to another and before I knew it we were making out on his lounge. Things escalated rather quickly and got hot and heavy and I decided that this was okay as I was on holiday and would never have to see this guy again. Whilst things were in the heat of the moment I looked at his laptop which was located 3 meters from where the activities were taking place and realized the green light for video recording was on. To say the least, things came to a sudden end and the police were nearly involved. I've decided to take a sabbatical from Tinder for the meantime.
I invited a guy to my favorite place, the zoo. It was going well, but shortly after arriving, he ate a pretzel and almost bit his tongue off. He began bleeding for the next couple of hours, and spitting out blood. I looked at it and half of his tongue was swollen and puffy. It looked horrible. He then tried to eat a hamburger and his eyes just displayed the pain. He tried to kiss me multiple times but my ninja bleep dodged the herpy-looking mess he had going on. Great sport. But it didn't work out.
I went on a Tinder date with a successful entrepreneur who had 2 degrees and a thriving business. I expected exciting and stimulating conversation. Instead, I found out that he didn't have time to read, so he paid his secretary to read books and summarize them in 10 to 12 pages because his time was too precious.
Not a horror story in the least. But on a first date, 1. Talked about marriage, children. 2. Talked about his friend who killed herself, and said the reason she did was because she wanted to be with him but he turned her down. 3. Every woman he dated was crazy. 4. Every woman he dated wanted to get back together with him now. 5. He psychoanalyzed me. 6. He shared his secrets on how to lie. 7. Laughed when I was uncomfortable. 8. Weird constant compliments, you are the most beautiful girl, like I can't believe how perfect you are. After all of that, I figured it would be a good hookup at least because the crazy ones are good at sex. But no, he wanted me to be the mother of his children and therefore couldn't have sex before dating. After I ended things 2 weeks later, he sent me a LinkedIn request.
I messaged a cute blonde girl one day, got a response, and after a while of back and forth making each other laugh and getting along, I mention I'm in a wheelchair, and suddenly she was losing her bleeping mind talking about our future and how she wants to explore places like Australia and I wouldn't be able to do that with her because of my wheelchair. I let her go on for a while to see if she'd ever bring it around to a normal person thought process, but it never happened. She lost her bleeping mind.
What is your Tinder horror story?
Not much of a story, but a girl said I made her uncomfortable by speaking in complete sentences rather than emojis. Said I seemed artificial.
Matched with a pretty good-looking guy, and our personalities clicked well. Not spectacularly or anything, but enough that we both happily agreed to meet up for a sushi dinner. Well, the well-toned, prim, and handsome guy the first matched with ended up being a very overweight, greasy-haired, rude one instead. He seemed very offended when I said, hey. Sorry I didn't recognize you, but you look nothing like your profile pictures. Dinner was pretty awkward after that. I tried to keep a lively conversation going, but he stayed on his phone the majority of the time. There was another time when a different guy pulled the same stunt, except instead of being rude, he was overly affectionate. Calling me pet names and acting as if we were already a couple. With that one I did leave pronto. He blew up my phone when I left, calling me every name under the sun. Good times.
We talked on Tinder for maybe 2 weeks before setting up a date. We decided I'll pick her up at her house, then we will go out to bowl. Everything went well, but she wouldn't make any type of eye contact. I figured something was up, so I asked her if everything was alright. She said she's fine, just tired. So the night continues, and after a few hours of being out she said with panic in her voice, I gotta get back home now, so I cut the date short to drive her back home. She told me to park one street over, which I knew was a problem. She jumped out of my car before I even stopped and ran to her house. Few weeks later she texts me back saying she had a good time and would like to go back out with me. I asked her what was wrong when we went out. She told me she was on house arrest and the cops showed up at her house that night after being out too long. TLDR, girl was on house arrest and didn't tell me. Kept her away from her house too long and she got in trouble from the police.
What is your Tinder horror story?
Had great texting rapport with this guy, really enjoyed his wit. We met up and I knew after a short time that I wasn't physically attracted to him. But I enjoyed talking to him, so it wasn't so bad. Until he proceeded to inform me that he has been periodically abducted by aliens throughout his life, ever since he was a child. I did not immediately hightail it out of the date, as I have been fascinated by the whole topic of UFOs and alien abductions for years. He even showed me a place on his arm where he believes his abductors implanted some sort of tracking device. I guess it wasn't necessarily a horror story, but I imagine for someone who isn't as open-minded as I am, it could have been. He admitted he did feel pretty stupid for revealing this on the first date, and we never went out again. I feel kinda bad for him.
Right when Tinder came out, before I got involved with my current GF, I was having the best time chatting with this amazing girl who was a paramedic. We both had hectic schedules and worked that weekend, so we just chatted via text for days and days, having a blast before we had time to meet up. She kept playfully asking me if I was sketchy or a criminal or anything like that, as she had a bad habit of falling for less than savory guys who had bad run-ins with the law and other criminals. Fast forward to 2 nights before we are to meet in person, and I'm walking to a buddy's house to chill and have some beers. 2 jewelry thieves decide to jump me for my gold chain, rings, and stab me in the back of the head. During the struggle, I was fine, just a bad gash to the back of the skull. I also had a reasonably sized bag of weed on me that ended up being spilled out of my pocket. So here I am sitting on the sidewalk leaking blood out of a stab wound in my head with weed on the ground in front of me, and out of a city of almost 3 million people with hundreds of ambulances. Guess whose ambulance shows up? Needless to say, after an awkward ambulance ride, we recognized each other right away. She unmatched me and never answered a text again. Thug life.